Good evening, everyone. I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening. The purpose for the Public Safety Committee meeting here tonight is to get the information that I thought that was very important to the public on local control. Tonight, the format would be we will have different organizations supporting local control come up to the mic, and pretty much the same format, just to let these individuals know who were down at the Board of Aldermen a few weeks ago. It's the same format. I need you guys to give me your position on local control and the name of your organization. And then the alderman, of course, I will go through the same process of asking questions. Just to let you know, those individuals that are invited down here were the St. Louis Police Officers Association, Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression, ACLU, Chief of Police, Dan Isom, and Nancy Rice with Nancy, Safer Missouri. I was going to say the other organization, Safer Missouri. And I must say this publicly, that my error, I did not, and apologize to the Black Police Officers Association. I did not invite them because I kept the same format at the Board of Aldermen. I want to publicly apologize to those officers out there. And as we move forward on this, and if we continue this process, if we see fit, and if I call another meeting, I would definitely have them come first and speak first, because I talked to a gentleman who lives in my ward, Eddie Simmons, about a different project, and we kind of elaborated on this, and told him then that I did not invite them because they were not on the information at that time, and they should have been. And I don't want to be the chairman not to include them in any future meetings. So the Police Officers Association, Ethical Society, I would definitely invite you at our next meeting. So in saying that, time is of the essence. I want to bring Jamala Rogers up first to speak. She would be representing Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression. And I know you have another meeting, Jamala, so thank you for coming down tonight.
Thank you, and thank you for convening this in a more broader way so that we can really actually have some community input and involvement. Because I think we're at the precipice of really having a wonderful opportunity to design a police department that'll be more accountable and responsive to our community. My name is Jamala Rogers. I am one of the co-chairs of the Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression. CAPCAR, as we call it, has been the principal organization for leading this fight, but we also think we represent the majority will of St. Louis citizens. Our efforts and activities have always been open to the public and to public scrutiny as we've been organizing over the last 20 years. This road to local control has been a long and one with many twists and turns. Our organization formation emerged from the negligent and deadly actions of police officer Joseph Ferrario in 1983, and from there came a community demand for more local control, more police accountability, the end to police brutality, and a civilian review board. So we've been working steadfastly on those aspects. For the last 20 years, the St. Louis Police Department has had an extensive body of evidence that has helped us to build a case for local control. This includes, but not limited to, in 2003, it was uncovered that for a period of nearly 20 years, police had discounted hundreds of rape complaints that not only prevented justice for those victims, but also skewed the rape statistics for the city. We also have the theft of the World Series baseball tickets. We've had a number of incidents of police shootings, yet 96% of the officers have been cleared. So time and time again, citizens have asked, where's the accountability for the police officers themselves? Also of concern to us is the growing hostility towards police and their perceived status of being above the law, and their perceived impunity when clear violations have been established. This is now a disturbing trend of police being shot or killed in the line of duty. A police department redefined under the current proposal will only exacerbate these tensions. And the reason that that's the case is because a lot of the the proceedings will not be open to the public, and even for those criminal investigations, which now are open to us under the Sunshine Law, would not be open. And so this would basically be a closed effort, and we would never know what the outcome is. Some of us maintain that we don't know it now with the Internal Affairs Division, but under this current system with the ballot initiative, we definitely won't have that openness. CAPCOR has been active and unrelenting in its efforts to actually work for local control, and as you know, the Board of Alder people have been an integral part of that. At one point, you all did a resolution, but you also did a ballot initiative where you understood that 70% of St. Louisans wanted local control. So this is a mandate from the people, and I think we need to hear that, and we need to respond accordingly. The ballot initiative is a smack in the face of citizens as well as entities like the Board of Alder People, CAPCOR, and others. In spite of the overwhelming evidence that the department is incapable of investigating itself, and in spite of the overwhelming evidence that St. Louis citizens support accountability and transparency, the Police Officers Association has moved one step further to implementing a secret police society where no one, not even local officials, will be able to know what's truly going on in the department. We're also concerned about the role of the police chief and that it could be significantly diminished in the cloaked ballot language. And of course, for a number of people who have seen what's happened to pensions are also concerned about the police pension as we are. And we included that language in our bill on the legislative state level to make sure that it stayed at the state level. We have further submitted to you that local control is no panacea. We understand that. But we also know that this is an opportunity to design the best possible process that results in an end product that represents the best thinking, the best research of effective police practices, and the highest participation of all our citizens. And I think that really is worth fighting for. But at the current level with the ballot initiative, we would be fighting against the ballot initiative come November 7th.
Okay, so regardless of how we get local control, you will be against this one here?
I will be, if that language is maintained on the ballot that we've been fighting against, right, in terms of the secrecy, we will be fighting against local control at the ballot for November 7th.
So if we don't have another opportunity, because this is not just the citizens of the city of St. Louis that would be voting on this. This is the state of Missouri. So without the state of Missouri and the kind of funds, not saying I support the language, but just taking a neutral position, I think members of the Board of Aldermen and understanding the budget and the type of budget that we're going through right now, would it be something to get local control and then change the language later?
We are open to all of those. We also have our own lawsuit going against the ballot initiative. And so we're going to continually work up to November 7th to see what happens, but we want the language and the police board to be accountable and to be transparent.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hey, let me go through my committee members. If they have any questions. You got a minute, Jamala?
Yes.
Okay. Alderman Kennedy, you have any questions?
Yeah, just one.
Oh, yeah, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you speak just a little bit more specifically? The language that you feel is incorrect or that you would challenge on the a petition is exactly what?
Okay. Part of the language, and John Chasnoff with the ACLU, who's also a member organization of the coalition, will speak more definitively on that. But basically, there's language that says that records will not be open. There's really implication that they oppose the Civilian Review Board, which is a key element for us that we've been working for. So unless that language changes, we don't think that's real local control.
And how long has CAPCOR been working on this issue?
Next year will be 20 years.
20 years.
We started in 1983.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, that's it. Alderman Schmidt, any questions?
I asked all my questions at the last hearing, and there's no difference in your testimony, so I have no questions.
Thank you.
Alderman Ortman, any questions?
I don't know if
question.
Here.
I mean,
That's pretty heavy too, Carl.
and I guess I'd have to refer to our council, but my understanding is if there's legislation on the ballot and it's passed, that the will of the people, I mean, it stays solid for a year, and after that, then the Board of Aldermen would be able to adjust it. Are you familiar with that?
No, I don't think the language says that.
Well, no, I know the language doesn't say that, but normally after, when it's a vote of the people, you know, it's solid for a year unless it's legally contested, but after that, it can be changed at the board, huh? Well, I'd have to check with legal counsel, but I think that then it can be done at the board.
Did you want to ask Dave the question now?
Dave, can you answer that?
Again, if we're amending the charter, then it would have to go back to the vote of the people. We wouldn't
Correct.
be able to do that.
But this isn't a
obviously.
charter, this is a vote.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd have to look at the language some more and see that. So I don't have a definitive answer.
But it was initiated by state, not by city.
Sure.
State initiative. So, no, we wouldn't have that right.
I'm pretty sure, can you get an answer? I'm
Sure.
pretty sure we will.
Sure.
But I think you can see the confusion with a ballot initiative of this sort. So I think the more that we,
I understand that part of it, I'm just saying that sometimes, you know, we need to get behind something and pass it and then fix it.
oh, I understand that. I've been doing this for a while, so I understand the legislative process. Thank you.
Okay. Was that it, Alderman? Okay, thanks. Vice Chairman French?
Yeah, just one question. So, Mr. Rogers, just so I'm clear, it sounds like you would be open to working with a process that if this thing was to pass, where we could see if we could create some kind of civilian review locally after the fact, but you're not convinced that this would allow that?
Exactly. And so I think there would be another round of interpretations, both through the courts or legislatively, to see what exactly the language really means. So it's pretty vague right now, and I think based on what we know about the both public and private opinion and position of the St. Louis Police Officers Association, we know that they are opposed to the Civilian Review Board. So I don't think it's going to be included.
All right. Alderwoman Howard? Yeah, he's in the next. Any questions? All right. Alderman Ornowitz?
Nothing at this time.
Okay. Alderman Kennedy, you have another
Yeah,
question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a few other things. CABCOR's been working on this, say, for 20 years or more. You were involved in going up to the state at the various hearings that were there for both civilian review and local control, even doing testimony.
That's correct.
You worked with, at that time, the mayor's office and the rest of that. So when it came down to this, you were not involved in the writing of this ballot language.
No, we were not included in the ballot language.
You were not included in any of those discussions?
None of those discussions, no.
Right. Have you had any discussions since that time with those who initiated the ballot issue?
No, we have not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Did you want to ask the three organizations that were involved? I mean, I thought that's where you were leading.
Say it again.
So the public will know there was only 3 organizations involved. Did you want to ask?
So that they could be on the public record?
Yeah. Right.
So, from my understanding, it was the mayor's office, the St. Louis Police Officers Association, and members of Safer Missouri.
Okay, all right. No other organization?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Are you going to comment on what next? Okay. Alderman Schmidt.
So, I mean, we went through this before, and I think Mr. Chasnoff is going to relate to this. It's my understanding under the initiative petition, which is under the section that's listed as 83.344, subsection 8, that it specifically says, starting at line 3, that the Civil Service Commission of the city may adopt rules and regulations appropriate for the unique operation of a police department. Such rule and regulations shall reserve exclusive authority over the disciplinary process and procedures affecting commissioned officers to the Civil Service Commission. And then it goes over and says, however, until such time as the city adopts such rules and regulations, which are those rules and regulations we just talked about under civil service, the commission personnel shall continue to be governed by the Board of Police Commissioners' rules and regulations in effect immediately prior to the establishment of the municipal police force, with the police chief acting in the place of the Board of Police Commissioners for purposes of applying the rules and regulations. Unless otherwise provided for, existing Civil Service Commission rules and regulations governing the appeal of disciplinary decisions to the Civil Service Commission shall apply to all commissioned and civilian personnel. The Civil Service Commission's rules and regulations shall provide, it says shall provide, that records prepared for disciplinary purposes shall be confidential, closed records, available solely to the Civil Service Commission and those who possess authority to conduct investigations regarding disciplinary matters pursuant to the Civil Service Commission's rules and regulations. A hearing officer shall be appointed by the Civil Service Commission to hear any such appeals that involve discipline resulting in a suspension or greater than 15 days and so forth. So under that, that's our enabling legislation, and so to change that, presumably it would require either another initiative petition, or I suppose the state of Missouri after a year could, or whatever the time period is, could so change the enabling, but the board, I mean, I'm not issuing an opinion about that, but the language here suggests that we wouldn't have the power to do that.
Thank you. If there's no more questions with Ms. Rogers, I want to thank you for coming down, Ms. Rogers. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Nancy Rice with Safer Missouri. Thank you, Ms. Rice, for coming down.
Thank you, Alderman Carter, and thank you, Alderman, for inviting me tonight.
You got your voice back, huh?
A little bit, and I'll try to maintain it for the night. I don't want to be too redundant for what you all patiently listened to from me 10 days ago, but I do want to just point out a little bit of sequence and history that I think is important, and that is that there's been legislation at the General Assembly for local control since the mid-'80s that I'm aware of, and it has not passed. And last year, we almost got it passed once a historic agreement was made between the city and the Police Officers Association, and they dropped their opposition. And even though I think we had 30 votes in the Senate, we still couldn't pass it. Now, the way, in my opinion, the way the Police Officers Association ended up negotiating with the city to favor local control was because a ballot initiative was filed by this group, A Safer Missouri, which everyone knows is funded solely at this point by Rex Sinkfield. Ballot initiative was filed to make a constitutional amendment that would have put every city in Missouri in control of their own police department, and which also would have ended state oversight of the police department pension. The Police Officers Association, and probably others, but particularly them, felt that that was draconian language, and they were very concerned about it. And I have read comments of Mr. Rortis that he said that's why they sat down and started talking, was they wanted to make an agreement with the city, a collective bargaining agreement that protected their pension. They did that. So at the end of last year's session, the session of 2011, excuse me, at the end of the session, the police officers were working with the city, with the ACLU, with Civic Progress, with RBC, with many, many organizations, not just the ones who are here tonight to try to pass this, but the Senate Pro Tem was angry about the China Hub bill, and he was angry at the Speaker of the House and would not allow this bill to go to the floor, and it died. It died at the Budget Oversight Committee. With the help of the Police Officers Association, we were able to persuade the governor, when he called a special session, to put local control on the special session. That was held, that was after Labor Day, and it went till nearly Thanksgiving, if people will remember. And we waited all that time trying to get a bill passed again, and again, the exact same thing. Senator Mayer changed his mind, wouldn't let the bill go to the floor, and nothing got passed again. Now, the Police Officers Association comes to me, a Safer Missouri, we have filed the ballot language, and says, if you'll put the bill that was in the special session in as a substitute for ballot language, we will support you. And I thought, and we will drop our opposition to the initiative. So basically, we dropped our demands on the pension, and our threat, whatever word you want to use, and they agreed to it. We had a very short period of time to write language and get it to the Secretary of State. And I, again, accept responsibility for being the person who had the city and the police officers at the table, because what I was attempting to do was write an initiative that was identical to what everyone had agreed to. Now, there is some different language on the police records, but I would argue vehemently that it does not have the effect that the ACLU believes it does. And I say that not as Nancy Rice attorney, because I am not one, but I will tell you that when the ACLU, when Chasnoff left a message for me saying we're going to oppose it because you have blocked a civilian review board, I went straight to one attorney, two attorneys, three attorneys. I've had the attorneys who worked on it. I've had the people from Deutsch. He was up here to see you last time. We've had a city councilor involved. I am positive that this does not block a civilian review board. The language, Craig, or Alderman Schmidt, that you read says, and any authorized body. If you all pass a civilian review board ordinance, that will be an authorized body, and they will have that language. There's no detriment to the police chief. Those records, excuse me, I said language. There's no detriment to the police chief's abilities, because when you talk about the Civil Service Commission here, that is the replacement on the ultimate authority, just like it is today, the Board of Police Commissioners. This is a transition bill. So I feel very certain and very strong that you can get the whatever civilian review that you work out as a Board of Aldermen, whatever you decide you want to see, you'll be able to do here. And there are not records. Our attorneys argued about this in court Friday, and they testified that they did not find one jurisdiction in the state of Missouri that had a policy on discipline records that is different from what is in this initiative. Okay. So I don't want to be overly defensive, because I think we've done a great thing here, getting local control almost to the ballot. I think St. Louis is going to get its police department. I think y'all are going to be the ones who run it. And like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on the criticisms that have been levied. But I do want to assure you, to the best of my ability, my information is that you can do what you need to do.
Yeah,
thank you. Questions?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, and I see you were straining at the end, but thank you for coming down. No, that's fine. I think the members here understand the importance of local control and how we get it, and later on we want to do something different with it, but it's still up to the public. It was important to me that the public know exactly what they were signing. They thought one thing they were signing something different. So it was very important that the public knows. Now, what they do with that and how they do it is something entirely different, but it is always important that we represent the city, the members of the Board of Aldermen. We want to make sure our constituents understand exactly what's going on out there. Local control is local control, no matter how you look at it.
And Alderman, let me say, I appreciate you doing this, because I appreciate having the opportunity to address these things in a public forum. I really do. Because I, too, want people to know what's going on.
Yeah. Transparency is very important.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Alderman Kennedy, you have any questions for Ms. Rice?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Okay. Thank you once again. Thank you once again for going
through
that chronology.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Have you since, realizing that there were groups and organizations that were left out of that process who've been at it for 20 years or more, have you thought about having some other dialogues with them at this point?
Alderman, the calendar, the reason that we did this quickly in December was to get our language into the Secretary of State. We want this on the ballot in 2012, not 2014. And so we're out collecting signatures on this right now. Right. So first of all, I would tell you that conversations about how It'll be governed. I hope that how the police department will be governed, I hope you all have them. I don't think I belong in those conversations, and that's not the stated mission of the organization. The stated mission of the organization is to try to get St. Louis control of its police department. So I would not presume to take a position with you or the mayor's office or the Police Officers Association on what a civilian review board looked like, for example. You've looked at it for years. I haven't.
I can appreciate your answer, but that's not answering my question. My question is really about making sure that we find as many ways as possible to have as large and as broad of a united front in support of trying to have local control as possible. And so my question was really about, have you had any dialogue with those organizations that were left out of the process as a way to really build that kind of united front?
The organizations that say they were left out of the process, no, sir, I have not.
Well, okay, you have to explain that at this point, because in our last hearing, you said pretty clearly they were left out, that they were not in the dialogue.
Well, that's what I mean. I don't want to. I don't want to parse words with you. I want to be very clear. I think I have been.
Okay.
That in the month of December, I worked with the city through the mayor's office, and I worked with the Board of Police, or with the Police Officers Association to craft language, and no one else was there. I fully admit that.
All right, thank you.
Sorry if I misunderstood your earlier question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Alderman Schmidt, any questions?
No, I appreciate what you were trying to do. You know, I honestly don't remember if the Board of Aldermen ever has a process whereby we review the rules and regulations of the Civil Service Commission. Perhaps Mr. Maybe Sam Dotson knows, or maybe our new public safety director knows. I do know that we attempt to keep politics out of the Civil Service Commission, and in that effort, I'm not sure if we do review those. Yeah. Obviously, if we do review them in some way, maybe there's some way to do this.
At the various highest levels.
I'm sorry, Sam, you want to state your name, identify yourself for the record?
Sam Dotson, Director of Operations for the city, from the mayor's office. At the various highest levels you do, but the Department of Personnel, the Director of Personnel, and the Civil Service Commission have an incredible amount of autonomy. So we'd have to get into specific which rules you were looking at to answer that question.
I mean, this says that the Civil Service Commission of the city may adopt rules and regulations appropriate for the unique operation of a police department. Such rules and regulations shall reserve exclusive authority over the disciplinary process and procedures affecting commissioned officers to the Civil Service Commission. I don't think we ever review disciplinary processes or procedures for our other employees because we're supposed to be keeping politics out of it. So in order, it seems to me, for us logically to follow what Ms. Rice was saying, we would have to have input into those rules and regulations to establish some sort of civilian review board.
And the charter gives the majority of those responsibilities to the Director of Personnel, who has an incredible amount of autonomy through the Civil Service Commission
to the Board of Aldermen
to promulgate those rules.
Right. So it doesn't seem to me that we would thereby have that ability to do that. It goes on further, and I agree with you. It seems to suggest that the civil service could establish other people to do these investigations, but it would not come to the Board of Aldermen. It would never come to us.
But I think, and dangerous ground here because I'm not an attorney, but I think you have to harmonize. You have state legislation that specifically calls out a way to have a civilian review board. And so I think you'd have to harmonize the charter and that other legislation. I mean, it's already passed.
Okay, Nancy, I don't want to elaborate on it, but Craig is an attorney.
Well, no. I am not practicing as an attorney here. I'm not giving a legal opinion. I'm giving just like anybody else.
He went to school for it. Anyway, how's that? Is that better? Okay.
Qualifies me, Craig.
No, I think what we want to make clear is civil service, and I'm on the same page. I'm not an attorney either. Civil service has the right to create a lookalike civilian review board, not the members of the Board of Aldermen. This is state legislation. Be very clear. The Board of Aldermen cannot override state legislation. So when you say that, it gives the perception that the public, the public may view the Board of Aldermen having the wherewithal to create this civilian review board when we can't. We have to put it back before the public, to the voters, in order for them to change anything on this, can I use this, on this state ballot initiative. That's all we're saying.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm not, okay.
No,
Yeah,
it says,
okay.
it's very clearly
Okay.
what it says, okay? So, I'm sorry, you want to move on? That's it? All right. Alderman Ortman? Howard? None?
Well, yeah, I do have. Ms. Rice, on the long term, I know this has been an arduous process, you know, going through the legislature starting in the 80s. Were other groups included as this moved, you know, in the early stages up until, I understand the time constraints you had most recently. Were other people brought to the table when it was in the state legislature and?
Well, lots of other people were involved, Alderman Howard.
I'm sorry?
A lot of other groups were involved. There was, I will send you tomorrow a list of the endorsees on it. I will tell you that the majority of them were citizens like me that just want local control. And so they weren't at the table discussing language. Mm-hmm. They, you know, they just want St. Louis to control its police force. And they were satisfied with that. So I don't want to suggest, I mean, there are many, many endorsements, and I'll send you that list tomorrow. Okay. I'll send it to Alderman Carter for the whole committee, but I don't want to imply to you that they all studied the language and came up with, and made that based on an opinion as to whether there was a civilian review board or not.
I understand
Okay,
that, but
I
there
just
were
wanna be
other people
very-
brought to the table, and the process went on and was delegated.
They were informed.
They
The
were
other people were
informed of
I mean,
that.
we went to 94 neighborhood meetings in St. Louis last year to talk about this. I was pleased. I mean, that was a big effort.
So it was very grassroots.
Tried to be, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chairman French. Apologize for passing. No, I passed her because the mic was so down. No. You got a question?
Okay.
Go ahead.
So just to clear up a couple things. So after Alderman Schmidt and Kennedy's question, so can you now kind of concede that the language does not allow for an independent civilian review board, and at best it can be just something controlled not by aldermen, not by citizens, but by the civil service?
No, Alderman, because the attorneys that I'm working with have told me different, but I'm not qualified to argue. I'm going to go back and check this. That I'll concede that, then I'm going to go back to it. I'm not qualified to stand, and I apologize that I didn't bring them, but you know, they're from Jefferson City, and it's a bit of a hoo-ha.
So I'm going to ask for I guess, an information request here.
Okay.
Do you think maybe you can go back to your attorneys and have them prepare something for us, bring it back to us to show us how we could create it?
Yes.
How it would be created?
Yes, I will ask that question.
In their mind, how we can create an independent.
I will ask
civilian
that
review
question
board.
because I stand here believing you can.
Okay.
So I think I owe it to you to give you an explanation.
All right.
All right. Arnold, you have any questions? Not at this time. Nancy, thanks again for coming.
Thanks for
down.
having me.
Really appreciate it. I know you're
Appreciate
doing
it.
some hard work out there.
Trying to pass an
Losing your
initiative.
voice, I can tell that. I must also say that Chief, you didn't sign, neither did Ed Roth sign or Sam Dodson sign, but I put you down here. Is that good to say? You guys are good? All right, okay. The next person is Jeff Roeder with the St. Louis Police Officer Association. We want to be kind and respectful with organizations in the room, if Jeff know what I mean.
I'll avoid name calling, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Jeff Roeder, on behalf of the St. Louis Police Officers Association, I serve as the business manager. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, honorable members of the committee, for inviting us here to speak with you tonight. And I appear here at the risk of having my words mischaracterized again by other groups, but that's where we are.
This
St. Louis-
isn't an ambush, Jeff.
I was not going to use that word either, Mr. Alderman. We had that conversation.
Yeah.
This is where we are, the St. Louis Police Officers Association. We're here to stay. We're in the community, despite the implications here that we're, as we were called tonight, some secret police society. We're a group that is very active in our community, engaged in our community, and has made a bold step forward in having a new relationship with the elected officials of the city of St. Louis and the people that you represent. We're not going to run away from that. We're going to continue to engage the people that we serve, and that's why they've sent the leader of the union tonight to speak with you. To comment on some of the things Ms. Rogers said, CAPCAR has to go back 30 years. Let's put this in historical perspective. 30 years to find a real tragedy involving the St. Louis Police Department. And Jamala, when I say that, I sincerely mean the Ferrario incident was a real tragedy. But the right thing happened. Joe Ferrario is not a police officer anymore. With regards to the so-called towing scandal, the so-called World Series ticket scandal, the right thing happened. Officers were brought to justice in those incidences. And these are what we call scandals around here because we're spoiled, would make people in other large metropolitan police departments blush to call these things scandals, where we've seen some real scandals in other police departments our size. Chief Isom and his predecessors should be commended instead of the constant implication that this is a police department run amok. They should be commended for the department that they operate and the complete and almost utter vacuum, utter absence of scandals in this police department. Now, that's not to say that we're perfect and not to say that we don't require oversight. But let's remember again that we have layers upon layers upon layers of oversight within the current governance of this police department and even more under the governance proposed in the ballot initiative. Now, with respect to the ballot initiative, you heard Alderman Schmid read the words, read all the legal jargon. But let me sum it up. Let me give you a summary of this ballot initiative. There's two major provisions in what Alderman Schmid read there. One, your discipline stays with your employer. Two, your disciplinary records stay with your employer. Now, does anyone in the room tonight think that's unreasonable? We've heard how wildly mischaracterized those provisions have been, and this calamitous talk about how this somehow precludes civilian review boards, which are authorized under state statutes and remain authorized under state statutes under the language in this ballot initiatives, that somehow it precludes open records, which is defined under state statutes and continues to be defined under state statutes. This is strictly a misrepresentation of what the ballot initiative does, and I can't for the life of me understand why certain groups have chose to mischaracterize it. Now let's give you a little bit more historical perspective, because we've heard much ballyhoo about how three groups got in a corner and cajoled one another and reached some secret self-serving deal about what this ballot initiative looks like. This ballot initiative is essentially the exact legislation that Representative Nasheed and Senator Kevney attempted to advance in the legislature in the special session and the regular session this past year. Now, it's correct that this minor tweaking of the language with regards to civilian, or with regards to employee discipline and with regards to disciplinary records was added, and I take full responsibility for that. Those are more protections that I advocated for my police officers when we were in a position of leverage in December after the legislation had failed to advance in the legislative session. I'll tell you that I had so much leverage at that point that I could have easily said, let's put it in there. No civilian review boards ever. Close the records under every possible condition. but the Police Officers Association, the cops used restraint in this situation, and we've been rewarded with it with a slap in the face by people that want to play pile on and vilify the men and women that are out there working to protect this city every single solitary day as hails of bullets fly by their ears in this very, very dangerous city. Let me again put this in historical perspective. We didn't omit the folks from CAPCAR and ACLU and other groups from these negotiations. They folded up their tents and moved camp at the moment the police officers entered into this negotiation. Instead of staying at the table, staying in communication with Senator Kebney and Representative Nasheed, they moved over to another senator's office, who we know well, and was in complete opposition of city control in any form, even a form in which cops' benefits and rights and dignity is protected. So those folks went over to that office and decided, what can we do to poison a legislative proposal that would preserve dignity and employment rights for police officers and their benefits? Let's not forget that. So they tried to add these poison pills with regards to domestic partners, which we knew would kill the bill, with regards to language about aldermanic fines. As you recall, every time we saw a new version of this certain senator's bill, you guys got a bigger fine for your certain interference with the police department that was coming. That's the real history of this ballot initiative. Alderman French, you asked a question about whether civilian review boards are allowed under this provision. They are. I mean, there's no prohibition against civilian review boards. The only thing the language does is say that you can't hand off discipline to the civilian review board. Civilian review boards are allowed under this language. They're allowed under state statutes, and the alderman can pass, has the enabling authority to pass legislation to create a civilian review board. I'm not going to run away from this dialogue. For every meeting you have, you'll have me there. But I'm also not going to allow the nature and the facts of this compromise to be misrepresented. I had a nice conversation with Alderman Carter the other night, and I promised I would try to be less caustic in our conversations. I've talked to Mr. Chasnoff from the ACLU. I told him we'd be glad to sit down and talk with them, and I'll make the same offer to, well, I guess Jamala left, but I'll publicly make the same offer to CAPCAR. We're here to engage the community, to make this police department work better for its community, and that's where we ought to stay, gentlemen and lady.
I think we're all proud of our St. Louis police officers.
As am I.
All right. Thank you for staying calm.
And I assume there'll be no questions, so I'll just take my seat.
You can sit in that chair if you want to.
I'm not going far.
We'll just slam you from afar. Thanks, Jeff. Alderman Kennedy, any questions? You want to pass that mic to him?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Alderman.
Okay, you understand that today with the state statute that civilian review boards can be created today.
That's right, yes.
But with in light of all the other legislation, how would you see that being created today? What powers could you see they could actually have today?
I don't think they're prohibited from any powers other than having access to these closed records and foisting discipline on the officers.
So is there any difference in what can presently happen today, and if the ballot initiative passes, what would be the significant difference in the ability of a civilian review board to function?
Well, I mean, I don't...
As far as you see it.
I suppose that under the enabling legislation that if absent this ballot initiative, that the Board of Aldermen could give disciplinary power to a civilian review board. Now, I think that would be a disaster, and that's...
Under the ballot initiative?
No, under the existing statute, the existing enabling legislation that allows you to create a civilian review board.
The present existing.
The present statute.
It doesn't do so as far as my knowledge and all the legal opinions that have been issued. It can't issue out disciplinary action. It can recommend it.
Good.
Now, the Police Association, my understanding, has taken a position against civilian review?
We have, and let me make that crystal clear again. I brought this up and fleshed it out during your original meeting. We oppose civilian review boards. It's our perspective that their only purpose is to drive a wedge between the police and the community, and we'll oppose them until we're convinced otherwise.
And you were in on the discussions with the ballot initiative language?
I was.
Okay. And did the issue of civilian review come up in those discussions?
Yes.
And what was the nature of those?
I wondered aloud if we should put provisions in the legislation to outright outlaw them. And I talked myself out of it, as I often do.
And so talking yourself out of it meant what then? That this is the language that came forward?
This is the language you end up with, yes.
Okay. Now, this language says that that really the authority for disciplinary action is up under the Civil Service Commission, correct?
Well, ultimately, yes. I mean, now there is a transitional period in there where we continue to use the existing rules as we have them with the Board of Police Commissioners. And for those that have suggested that the police chief has less power, until the Civil Service Commission were to adopt new rules, the police chief has all the power of the current Board of Police Commissioners, which is more power than the police chief has ever had. And once those rules are promulgated, his powers are described in the city charter, which is not anything that we've created.
Right. Was there anybody in on those discussions who was advocating for civilian review to ensure that it appeared or reflected itself in the ballot language in your discussion?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Alderman.
Was anyone advocating in your discussions in the creation of the ballot language to make sure that the ballot language that is before us now, that the petition is being circulated for, would reflect the ability to have civilian review?
I was the only one that appeared to have any concerns about civilian review boards.
Okay. So, and I think that's part of where some of the concern is coming, is that those who've had a long history working on the issue of local control as well as civilian review were not in on the discussions, including anybody at this Board of Aldermen.
Right.
And that's where some of the concern.
And I understand that leaves a sour taste in the mouth of the Board of Aldermen, Alderman Kennedy, but we were invited to the table. We didn't set the table. It wasn't our table to set. We showed up when we were invited, and we engaged, and we would have engaged if the aldermen were there too. I mean, we didn't not want to deal with the aldermen. We would have engaged with anybody at the table, but the players were who they were, and I think that the outcome of those negotiations is something to be proud of.
Okay, you are aware that present state statute that says that the St. Louis Board of Aldermen cannot interfere with the functioning of the St. Louis Police Board? You're familiar with that state legislation?
Yeah, well, no elected official can obstruct the operations of the police department. That's correct, yes.
And you realize that there's no detailed definition about what obstruction would be to their functioning?
I think it's well established.
It's not in the statute.
I think it's well established under court precedent what obstruction would consist of.
Were you you were not in on the discussions early on with civilian review between the Police Association and CABCAR and representatives from the Board of Police Commissioners and the rest of that? You were not in on those discussions?
No, I've only been on the job for about a year.
Okay. A lot of those discussions, obstruction became very broadly based and very broadly defined, almost to where you couldn't even take a pencil from there and do anything. So I don't think it is as clearly defined by various court cases as what is being portrayed here. As it turned out, the interpretation basically came forward that the Board of Aldermen could create a civilian review process, but that process would have to be adopted by the Board of Police Commissioners to actually be enacted. For that civilian review board to be able to have the power to function in terms of making recommendations and getting information, because that information was really under the authority of the Board of Police Commissioners. Sure. This is not much different from that. where, yes, a civilian review board could be created, but to get information, it would have to be adopted and or endorsed by the Civil Service Commission. So it's not much change when it comes for the ability to really have local control or local control in terms of civilian review.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for
Except that
answering
the
my
Civil
question.
Service Commission is a local political body created by the charter voted for by the citizens of St. Louis.
I think there's also a financial fine if you interfere. I think if I remember in the preamble of the legislation, it's $2,500 for each occurrence.
That's correct.
And or jail, something like that.
That's correct.
Yeah. So,
Oh, you know, some argued that even the Board of Police Commissioners was local because the people lived here. So there's a lot of ways to really define that, but that's not the spirit of what was talked about when having local control.
Correct, correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That be it? All right. Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Schmidt, any questions for Mr. Roeder? Go ahead.
Mr. Rhoda, first of all, I hope you don't feel that by using restraint that there's been some sort of slap in the face, because that's certainly not ever been my intent. I mean, I've worked many years with the police department, with the community and so forth on a whole host of law enforcement issues. And I have always, with very few exceptions, I've had a very good relationship with police officers. And for the very same reasons that you have not supported civilian review, others of us have thought that at least we should examine it, because there is frequently this schism, and you indicated that you believed it would be a wedge. Some of us have felt that, depending on what the details are, that there tends to be this separation sometimes between the community and the police department. I'm not one to describe who's at fault in those particular circumstances, but fault is important.
Both sides could do better.
But trying to get together is important. So yes, the details are important, and there have been different opinions about what that should look like. The importance here, and I have made no decision. I mean, I think local control is an important thing for the city to have. There needs to be that affinity and closeness and direct involvement with the police department. It exists everywhere else other than Kansas City and St. Louis. So I haven't said that I don't think that people should vote for this. What I do believe is that people always should know what they're voting for or what they're voting against. And so this section, and we're sort of, at least I'm holding off and hoping that Nancy comes up with some actual legal opinions, because none of us are practicing law up here other than our legal counsel, who's out in the audience, I guess. But it appears that it circumscribes, just as you hoped it might, how that might be established, and that is that the civil service would be in control of however that worked out in terms of discipline and review. So.
Much as other city employees are subject
Sure.
to, yes.
Right. And we like to treat our police officers better, usually, it seems, than our city employees. And so this would be an opportunity, at least, that may be circumscribed by this. And it may or may not change people's minds, but the purpose of this is for us to, at least in our own, at least my own mind, to see whether this does do that, and then other people who are voting on this should know one way or the other whether it makes some difference to them as they're going to the ballot.
Well, I trust the Secretary of State. She does a lot of work on writing these ballot initiatives, and I think she knows which important provisions ought to be summarized. So.
Well, of course, when you go to the ballot box, it's not going to have this long of a section. Everybody's not going to have that. They may have an opportunity if the Post-Dispatch and others on the various internet and social media focus in on that subsection 8, they may have an opportunity to know that, but they won't know that going to the ballot.
Well, I suspect the more meetings you have, the harder it will be to say that they didn't know it was in there.
I suspect you're correct. Thank you.
All right. Alderman Ortman?
No question.
All right. Alderman Boyd?
Yes, I do. Jeff, I have a couple of questions.
Yes, Alderman.
Number one, I know you're real passionate about civilian review, and you made it very clear the position of the St. Louis Police Officers Association. I'm just kind of curious if you can cite at least 2 examples across the country or in the state of Missouri in which civilian review boards have failed the citizens of that particular city.
Well, it's not my role to decide whether they failed the citizens, with all due respect, Alderman. It's my role to make a determination about whether or not they fail police officers and their rights. And I'll tell you that it's my opinion, the position of our international union, the Fraternal Order of Police, that they have failed in every instance.
Can you just cite 2 examples so that I can research it?
I will cite them all, Alderman.
No, just 2. Do you know if, on the top of your head, I mean, I'm just thinking that, I mean, you're very passionate about this, so.
That's right.
Certainly you know of a couple of instances where it has failed police officers.
Well, the Cincinnati situation is probably the most well-known situation that I'm aware of.
What happened in Cincinnati?
It became exactly what we fear here, a kangaroo court, a court of star chamber, and that's not to the benefit of anybody, Mr. Alderman.
Okay. So if we use what happened in Cincinnati as an example, do you think we could have learned something from Cincinnati?
Well, hey, listen, the legislation, as has been pointed out repeatedly, does not preclude civilian review boards. So I hope that the Board of Aldermen, the Civil Service Commission, will look at other places and see what's worked and what hasn't. And if you do stand up a civilian review board, I hope you do it in a very thoughtful way. But in the meantime, we'll be drug along kicking and screaming the whole way.
No, I'm not arguing the point that it can't happen in the ballot initiative. I'm just curious, and I just want to get a better understanding from the Police Officers Association or the police officers' point of view. What was so bad about civilian review? I mean, what brought them to the conclusion that it's bad for police officers? So you cite the Cincinnati case, and I'm just asking, do you think that we could have learned or we can learn something from what happened in Cincinnati?
Absolutely. Yes, it can be done better than it's been done before.
Okay.
I will acknowledge that.
And you are a legislator, right?
That's right.
And we all know as legislators that we write bills that oftentimes is work in progress, right?
Sure.
And so you can come along later on and tweak it and make it better. So what we see that might happen in one city or county in Missouri or across the country doesn't mean that it will happen in St. Louis. Would you not agree?
That's right, Alderman. To extend that argument, you could make the same argument about this ballot initiative. I mean, there's people here that have characterized it as imperfect. The same process exists to make the ballot initiative better.
The only reason I'm bringing this up and trying to have this public dialogue with you is because I hear the frustration and I hear the animosity to some point about civilian review as if it's just this awful thing, and I'm not convinced that it is. So that's why I wanted to get a better understanding, you know, from you. But not to belabor that, I'd like to ask you another question. As a legislator, from what you know from other legislators across the state, I'm just kind of curious, do they feel that citizens in St. Louis are inept in any way, that they are misinformed, miseducated about how they want to govern their city?
I think there are politicians that capitalize on opportunities to drag the city of St. Louis to the mud, and I was never one of them. You know, I think that St. Louis has a lot to be proud of. It's a great city. I've lived in this area my entire life and have done so by choice, and will probably live here to the day I die. It's the economic engine of this state. Without this city, the state doesn't thrive like it does. I never quite understood that approach, Alderman, but it wasn't the approach that I took.
and I appreciate your personal thought, but as a whole, the General Assembly, you know, legislators across the state of Missouri, do they feel that we just have no idea as citizens of St. Louis on how to govern ourselves?
Yeah, there are some. I mean, for some folks, you're their favorite punching bag. I mean, just not to get too far off the subject, but I think it's a damn shame that this China hub deal couldn't advance to the legislature. I thought it was not only a great deal for St. Louis and its economic vitality, but for the entire state. And I think that if that deal was somewhere else, it may have gotten further along. I can see Alderman Carter is nervous, and I'm going to really get off the topic.
We want to stay focused.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, the reason I ask those questions is, as I hear frustration from police officers, you know, want to have it their way, and they certainly have a right. Every interest group has a right to their opinion and to fight and advocate for their cause. And, you know, it's a little frustrating for me as a city alderman that we have to fight for our right to be a city as one, and that we have to depend on out-state legislators to help us govern our city. I mean, that's not normal across the country. And if it was a best practice, why are other states not following our model? I mean, it's just very frustrating. And, you know, I have to support the citizens of St. Louis. I think oftentimes we have voted on initiatives that we support, and Jefferson City says no. They know what's best for us. Now, how does that happen? That happens because there are special interest groups, just like there were special interest groups working on this legislation. And I'm convinced at the end of the day, if everybody's working on one accord, such as the special interest groups that worked on this legislation, we would all be in harmony. But unfortunately, that didn't happen this way, and I'm just hoping that somehow good can come out of all of this.
And unfortunately, Alderman, I think that if the ACLU and CAPCAR were the special interest groups that had promulgated this ballot initiative, that no one would be complaining about being left out.
Thank you, Jeff. That's all I have.
That's not true at all, Jeff. We knew about it. I was a little irate that we were not included. That's why we're having these public discussions. It wasn't from ACLU, it wasn't from CAPCAR. I want to be very clear on that.
Very good.
Okay. Alderman French?
No questions.
No questions. Alderwoman Howard, any questions?
No.
I didn't miss Alderman. Alderman Arnowitz?
No questions at this time.
All right. Jeff, I want to thank you for coming down tonight. No, I'm not going to say that. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
You've heard my commitment, Alderman. We'll be here every time you invite us.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. All right. We're going to bring the Chief of Police up. Dan, you didn't sign, but you're down here to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me again, Alderman, Alderwoman. Thank you for having me here today to speak about this local control ballot initiative. It's been well established that many people weren't involved in the process for this ballot initiative, so I won't go through that again. But I think Alderman Boyd raised the point at the last meeting that it's likely that this will pass. Many ballot initiatives, if they don't pass this time, they'll pass the next time. It seems to me there are several different issues related to local control. One is just a matter of principle, that the city should control its police department, and certainly that's been voted on by the citizens of St. Louis, and they overwhelmingly are in favor of the police department being controlled by the city of St. Louis. The second issue, of course, is a financial issue that I talked about before. That is not of a major concern because, as you know, you already control our budget and approve our budget. But the last two measures are most important to me, and I think important to this body as well and the community, and that's the structure of the police department and how it's controlled. And then the last part is transparency. I think when this is actually passed, that everyone needs to come together and think about those two ideas, structure and control of the police department, and also transparency. I think what happens with most communities is you live in a vacuum. And if you are not sort of a student of law enforcement, you don't look at other communities, other police departments, to see what are best practices, what's worked in the past, and what's working right now. What I will say to you, and Jamala Rogers has said this as well, local control is not a panacea, and we've got to do our homework if we are going to achieve what everyone expects us to achieve with local control. I agree with the police association. I think if you look at us in terms of other police departments around the country that are locally controlled, I go through these conferences all the time. We are one of the best police departments, even in our current process, in this country, in this nation, hands down. When you look at the scandals and the corruption that are going on in other police departments, it would pale in comparison to the minor things that have happened in the city of St. Louis. Now, can we improve? We can always improve. And I think one of the biggest factors in local control is this issue of transparency, this issue of building more trust in our police department, which is ultimately going to help us to do a better job. And so if we don't achieve that with local control, what have we really accomplished? If we lose control of our police department with local control, what have we really accomplished? So I hope going forward that those are the discussions that we have, and we try to shape a police department that is going to achieve those two things, that we have structure and control, and we have transparency to make our police department better. I will say that civilian review is a good thing for the police department. If you take Cincinnati, which was under local control, they went through some very, very difficult times 10 years ago. So much so that there were riots in Cincinnati. And so what the community did was come together. The FOP came together with the police department, with the citizens, and developed a process of oversight where now today, Cincinnati is in a much better position, and there is much more transparency, and there's much more trust in the community in Cincinnati. So Cincinnati has gone through some difficult times under local control. They're in a better place right now, but it's because the police association, the police department, and the community came together in a way that everyone felt comfortable about how they were providing service to the community. So that's my only hope is going forward, that we really sit down and think about what we're going to do, because there are different models under local control. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Some of them have worked, and some haven't worked. So I'd like to say that you're going to start out with a very good police department. What we do with it will determine whether it'll get better or it'll get worse.
Thank you, Chief. Alderman Kennedy, any questions with Chief Isom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, thank you for your comments and clarifying some of the things with Cincinnati. From your knowledge, did they have a civilian review process before that rioting?
You know, I'm not sure if Cincinnati had a civilian review process before the rioting, but of course, as you know, as a result of that, Cincinnati went under a consent decree with the Department of Justice. The ACLU was involved in that as well. So they went through some very, very difficult times 10 years ago. And out of that consent decree, I think they're in a better place. But hey, this was under local control. And there were several riots that happened 10 years ago in Cincinnati and other communities that ultimately went under consent decrees.
In fact, one of the representatives from the U.S. Justice Department that was helping to facilitate our discussions here was involved in facilitating those in Cincinnati. They did have a form of it, which is considered to be one of the weakest forms, which was the monitor form, they call it, of civilian review. It did not help improve the community-police relations, and so rioting broke out because it was not that level of, as you call it, transparency. Consequently, they went under the consent decree and were really forced to put something together that was more representative of what the community needed as it related to civilian review. And then people got a better feel for the transparency, so it did help in calming the public and having a better relationship between the public and the police department. However, the U.S. Justice Department, who speaks very well and very highly of civilian reviews, say that having to create one after a riot is the wrong time to have to do it. It's better to do it when people are calm and can sit down at a table and can work it out intelligently without all of the chaos that can come from rioting and some major traumatic incident that causes people to come to the table. And that's one reason why we put something forward when we didn't have a major incident several years ago for a civilian review. So it is not the monster that some people would portray it. As you also mentioned, Chief, you know, that it didn't appear to be really anyone advocating for civilian review in those discussions when they created this ballot language. So it makes it pretty clear to me that it was not really a priority, and therefore it ended up being limited in what could actually happen out of it. So I do appreciate what could actually come to the table for civilian review has been limited by this ballot language. So I do appreciate your comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Schmidt, any questions?
Last time, as you remember, Chief, I didn't have any questions, and I really don't have any questions this time, but I was remiss in not thanking you. I know you know that I respect and appreciate what you do for the city of St. Louis and what your command folks do, as I do what the officers do, and I hope I relayed that clearly to Mr. Rorta tonight as well. And what you said in terms of that trust and transparency, you know, I see that we're at odds, different groups are at odds in terms of how we get to that. It seems to me, though, that we're all looking for that, and I know that the alderman from the 18th did not this time encourage Mr. Rorta to look at the Department of Justice models and reports about the civilian review boards, but I hope we would all revisit that. And it seems to me that you're somewhat a student of that. I won't say expert because that always puts people in a hot seat and it's the wrong place to be. But it's something that we need to talk about some more, and I would agree with you that now when we're putting these things together is the best time to do it, because we could make some really bad decisions if we're forced into it, or somehow judges are telling us or people in the streets are telling us what we need to do. I think it's better if we all work with what the people in the police and we as legislators are trying to do at this time. So I appreciate your comments.
Alderman Ortman, any questions?
No, just thank you, Chief, for everything you do.
Thank you.
Thanks. Alderman Boyd, any questions?
Yes. I apologize, I was late. Maybe Ms. Rice have already answered this, but I'm going to ask you, since you're standing up there, maybe you know. You know, in the ballot initiative, it has the language in there about the police department taking over the sheriff department. Do you have a better understanding of what that language means?
No, I don't.
Was that talked about? I'm going off. Ms. Rice, you didn't talk about that?
No, I didn't talk about it this time. I understand it's an emergency.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to you. Okay. Chief, for some reason, I sense maybe some possible trepidation about local control. I mean, you were mentioned a couple of times, we have to be careful. Under local control, this happened over there, in other places. What would be your concern about this transition of local control?
Well, as chief, and I talked about it at the last session, what's important to me is control over hiring, discipline, and firing. I think that's extremely important to any organization. And so none of that has been defined, and certainly within the Civil Service Commission, establishing the rules for the police department. We've been doing this for over 150 years, and so we have gone through the ups and downs in terms of establishing rules that create good order in the police department, who is going to determine which one of those rules transfer over to the Civil Service Commission? That's of great concern to me. When we do hiring, our hiring process is very different from an ordinary employee of the city of St. Louis. We go through a rigorous process, and we certainly have very high standards, not only for officers in the police department, but civilian employees. You know, one of the things we talk about in terms of transparency, we want to be as transparent as possible, but we want to be transparent and safe too. There is confidential information within the police department that will never be revealed, and for good reason, because people's lives are at stake not only within the police department and outside the police department. Those are things that concern me very much. And in addition to that, firing. We've established high standards in the police department. You might steal something in the city and not get fired. You steal something in the police department, you're going to get fired. That's a standard that we have. You might lie as an employee of the city, but if you lie in a police department report as a police officer, we're going to try to fire you.
That's a difference.
And so there are a lot of differences, and those are the things that concern me but haven't been talked about. Hopefully they will be talked about in the future. So that's my trepidation moving forward. This issue of structure and control of the police department, who's going to determine that? And in this ballot initiative, the Civil Service Commission determines that, not the chief, not anyone else. And so who are those people going to be? So that actually concerns me quite a bit. And then if we're talking about transparency, as we talked about, how is that going to be any different than what we're doing right now? I don't really see much of a difference. That's where civilian review comes in. I believe, based on what I said at the last session, that we can withstand the scrutiny of anybody. I believe in my police department, I believe in what we do, and I believe in our people. So if a civilian review is looking over our investigations and our decisions, I think they will withstand that review. And I'll give you this example. We've had many officers who have been charged with criminal offenses. They've gone to court, and citizens on that panel have acquitted them because they believe that they were not responsible for those crimes. And so I believe the same citizens could be just as objective as they look at the responsibilities of the police department, what they've done, and come to the same conclusions that we've come to. And that would be good for us. It would be good for people to see that we're doing a good job. So those are the issues. Not that we can't deal with that going forward, but we do have to talk about it.
Well, let me ask you this, so two-part. When should we start the conversation, and who should be involved in the conversation?
Well, if you take the model of the Department of Justice, when crises have happened, everybody comes to the table. We could do that without a crisis. We don't have a crisis right now. This is a time where everybody can sit down calmly and discuss these issues and craft something that, you know, everybody at least have some stake in. Everyone's not going to get everything they want, but certainly we could get consensus and have something that is a locally controlled model. So I think as many people at the table as possible.
And you have no problem with aldermen sitting at the table?
No.
Okay. So would you do me a favor? You know, would you submit something in writing as far as, you know, who should be at the table? I mean, I'm leaning on your expertise as having a PhD in criminology, being the chief police of this city, to make sure that we don't miss a step. Because I hear what you're saying, and that's very sensitive. So we want to make sure that everybody is at the table so that we can do it right. So could you submit something, your thoughts about, you know, who should be at the table? And we should probably start talking about this soon, whether it passes or not. I mean, one day it may pass if it doesn't pass at this point. Another thing, you brought up something to mind. I have a question that may be a little bit off, but if a police officer goes to court and he perjures himself, are there any consequences for that as far as being a police officer?
Yes.
you have rules for that?
Of course, our own rules indicate that you can't do that. But also, in terms of your credibility in court, it's likely that the prosecuting attorney won't find you credible anymore, and you won't be able to testify. Just by virtue of not being able to testify, you can't do your job anymore.
Okay.
So, you know, perjuring yourself is an issue that would probably get you dismissed from the police department.
Okay, just curious. Thank you, that's all.
All right.
Appreciate it, Chief.
Alderman French, any questions?
No real questions, just wanted to thank you for coming, let you know that I appreciate what you do. You have one of the most difficult jobs in the city of St. Louis, and I think we're lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Alderman Howard, any questions?
No questions, but thank you, Chief Eisen, for your presence and your concern with this.
All right. Alderman Ornowitz, any questions?
No question. I just want, Chief, I want to thank you for taking your time coming down here. It's always a pleasure listening to you. You have a very good outlook with the police department. And I can also echo the same thing. I think, all in all, if you go to different cities, we have one of the better police departments all around. So, thank you.
Chief, I'm going to elaborate on what my colleague requested. Is it possible, or would you be willing to submit to this committee what you think a civilian review board should be made of?
Okay.
Okay. Appreciate it. And thanks for all your work, Chief.
Okay, thank you.
You have a good evening. You guys are not signed, but Ed Roth and Sam Dotson, I don't know who would want to come up and speak. Yeah. Where's John at? Yeah, he didn't sign either. I signed your name, John. You didn't sign this, but I signed your name. State your name, Mr. Roth. Of course, we know you are, but for the record.
My name is Eddie Roth, and I'm the Director of Public Safety for the City of St. Louis as of Monday of this week. Thank you. I think that I'll be the sole presenter. Sam and I talked it over. I'm here today as the new guy. I was pleased to be invited, and it was, you know, right about the time of the announcement that I got a letter from you, and I'm getting up to speed. I will be happy to answer questions you have tonight, but I'll look forward to coming back when I'm the word homework has come up a few times during this evening, and I have more homework to do. But I would tell you that I have given thought to this issue before. I served on the Board of Police Commissioners from 1998 through 2001, and that was during a period that included the riots in Cincinnati, and during a period in which there was a lot of interest in civilian review. I have thought about it. I have not thought about it in more recent times at the depth that I did then, and will want to spend some time going through the literature and seeing where civilian review has gone in more specific ways in the last 10 years, but I am happy to do that. I want to affirm to this committee that I am looking forward to working with all of you and to answering and getting you information that you need and having a productive dialogue on all matters of public safety. I do understand that under the charter, that should this initiative pass, make it on the ballot and pass, that the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department would become a division of the Department of Public Safety. And so I think it's important that we be talking and be thinking about that now, and in various forums and at City Hall and out in the community, and at your convenience and at your pleasure. I do have just a couple of other comments. These are more in the nature of sort of observations of things that I learned during my first tour in this area of public safety when I was on the Board of Police Commissioners, and more specifically when I was president of the Board of Police Commissioners, which was in 2000 and 2001. When we were looking, when the police board was looking at the question of direct public involvement in professional standards and use of force, both Chief Ron Henderson and Les Bond, who came on the police board at the same time I did and was a great help to me in understanding many things while I was on the police board, recommended that I speak with former St. Louis Police Lieutenant Colonel Atkins Warren, who at that time was a member, was a principal in the Justice Department's Community Relations Division, and who worked on police community relations all around the country. He had spent 35 years or so in the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, and then was the chief of police in Gainesville, Florida, first African-American chief in that community. And he's a really interesting, lovely guy, very thoughtful man. And I would say that his testimony on this question of direct public involvement really made an impression on me. I can still picture it in my mind's eye today. And it echoes really what the chief, I don't know if the chief left, Chief Isom mentioned, this idea of, he said, you only want one chief of police, that the chief of police is the font of professional standards in a police department. And if you're genuinely interested in reform and improvement on matters of professional standards and use of force and other issues that other matters of police operations that have caused a wedge, then you need to empower your chief through the use of public participation, and that the people who are involved should be there to help the chief in the way that the chief sees he or she needs help. And so I think that still is an important principle to keep in mind as you look ahead. I'll make one other comment, and this relates to Alderman Kennedy's comments about how during times of good relationships are the times when you can build a system that makes them even better. I would take that principle and ask you to consider it in the context of what how public participation could be used in ways that strengthen professional standards, that bind the community closer together with police, and that prevent the occurrence of unjustified use of force. And I would say, think about public involvement in professional standards before something bad happens. That is to say, sort of the first, sort of large, well-staffed community review board was in New York, and it took the place of what the Board of Police Commissioners has done historically here, and it became kind of the judge of specific disciplinary cases. But I think there is a productive role for the community to play in the development of professional standards, in the kind of training that police receive, in becoming engaging in conversation with the community so that point of views can be understood, in matters of officer safety. And if civilian review in many quarters has been viewed as sort of a conflict, an adversarial process, there are ways to, I think, opportunities to build these kind of systems which demonstrate the broad range of shared interests that all members of the public have with police officers, the vast majority of whom citizens admire. So those are just some concepts. I know that doesn't help you in terms of who should be on a committee and what the procedure should be, but those are things that I recall from my time on the Board of Police Commissioners, and I am looking forward to working with you on, putting some details on what makes sense.
Thanks, Ed. You mentioned that you're a strong believer that the chief should run the employees of the police department.
I think that when it comes to professional standards, and especially on use of force, that is the key. The chief is your key.
Well, with this ballot initiative, neither you or I can interfere with anything. If I can quote, it was in the beginning. I'm not going to look for it. I pretty much, here we go. Any person who violates this section shall be liable a penalty of $2,500 and disqualified from holding any office. But at the top it says that no elected or appointed official of the state of any political subdivision thereof shall act or refrain from acting in any manner to impede, obstruct, hinder, or otherwise interfere with any member of a municipal police force established under section 84.343. So from my understanding this, you or I cannot discipline any officer, regardless of your title, public safety director or not. So how does that make you feel? That having this new title as public safety director, understanding that pretty soon the city of St. Louis may have local control, how do you feel about not having control of the police department if it's supposed to be under your department?
I don't, you know, I'd have to spend more time with that provision, but I know that it mirrors one that's in Chapter 87 now that prohibits officials' involvement in. I think that's more of an obstruction of justice provision and is not one that has to do with governance of the police department. And I would say that in the practical sense, my experience in working with 2 chiefs and being on the police board and getting to know some of you and many of your predecessors, that you know, the give and take between aldermen and police commanders, I think has always worked out pretty well. I'm not saying it always has been perfect, but in terms of having an influence on the department and shaping how policing is done in your wards and what the priorities are and where the troubles are and you know, and where the opportunities are, that it's worked out pretty well. So I don't, that doesn't concern me.
Okay, good. My next question. Were you part of the meeting with the mayor's office, Ms. Rice, and the St. Louis Police Officers Association?
I was not.
You're not privy to that meeting?
No, that's all before my time.
Did anybody bring you up to speed with that meeting?
No, I have not. You know, I mean, not that. You know, it just hasn't come up. I've just been. I was hired in July, late July, or I think I started the first week of August at City Hall, and before that I was an editorial writer at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and nobody was inviting me to any meetings.
You should have all the answers. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go down and see if my colleagues have any comments. Alderman Kennedy, any questions?
Thank you,
my
Mr.
new
Chairman.
Director of Public Safety?
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
I do appreciate your comments. It was, you know, part of our envisioning when we talked about civilian review to, you know, to create a vehicle in which that kind of broad-based community discussion and dialogue could happen. You may remember that the review board that we talked about putting forward only made recommendations. It was not a disciplinary group or council. It could only recommend after doing a level of investigation or taking in complaints. So it was, that was never really a question. But the whole idea of being able to have that level of transparency and input from the community, various entities and experts in the area, as well as the Justice Department, said that's the excellent way to go. That's the way to keep people engaged, involved, apart, and to keep that divide from happening. So I do appreciate your comments. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Alderman Schmidt, any questions?
First of all, welcome. And
thank you.
Yes, thank you for being here as well. And I would echo what the alderman from the 18th said. As I recall, we looked at having the weakest form in which they might just sort of see whether the process that was being engaged in by the police department had been done appropriately, sort of like the Jimmy Carter type of thing, going down to watch elections or whatever, versus the other end, which would be actual imposition of discipline and so forth. And the model that was chosen was sort of in between that would leave it with the chief and the Board of Police Commissioners or whoever was in charge of doing all of that. So now we have asked Mr. Rorda, various people have, and we asked Ms. Rice how they would envision, based on this provision of paragraph 8 under 83.344, which is the ballot initiative language. I don't know if you've looked at that language or not yet.
I've read through it once. I'd need to spend a lot more time with it to really feel comfortable and talk about it.
And then, you know, I read most of it this evening, and we've talked about it this evening, and I think Mr. Chasnoff will undoubtedly talk about it more because he did the last time. And that is, we asked Mr. Rorda how he would envision some sort of civilian review board, and we heard that he's not a great fan of civilian review boards, and that Ms. Rice believes that, based on her conversations with some attorneys in Jefferson City, that she does see a pathway to civilian review boards. And so my question to you is, have you, without any necessarily specifics, have you thought of some path or some sort of way that we also could achieve a civilian review board under the structures of this?
Well, I have ideas, but they're not well enough formed to share this evening, except to say this. I think that there is potential to reach something that can be embraced by everyone and that could really make a positive difference in police community relations and accountability. And, you know, I didn't hear anybody categorically refuse or insist on anything in any of the conversations that I've heard here tonight or at the other hearing. I think that there are a lot of options and possibilities, and again, I would come back to the idea of one chief of police, you know, who is the upholder of professional standards, and the conversation should be with the chief saying, here's how we think we can help you. And the chief saying, here's how I think you can help me, and establishing that kind of rapport so that your chief executive, the one who is out there making assignments and is in charge of the supervision of police officers, has the insights and help from the community to do that job better, and someone that he can reach out to during times of potential misunderstanding to prevent the kind of crises that divide communities.
And I believe that under our charter, the chief of police is selected by the mayor. I think that's right.
I don't know. I'd have to, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, so perhaps he selects you and you select the chief.
Right,
Okay.
that may be.
All right, because that would be an important step.
Yes.
I heard the chief indicate some of that same concern, obviously, of having the repository of the standards and so forth there, and the hiring and firing and all the rest of that. And so what I'm sort of hearing is not a concern about what the function currently is of the Civil Service Commission, but whether or not they would be the best repository at this point of being able to do some of those things in terms of the standards and the use of force.
I'm not concerned about that. I think it can be done in a way that accommodates the interests that the chief expressed, in which I agree. It will have to be a careful process, and will have to involve reasonable people, you know, in the personnel department. And, you know, my sense is, in talking to people whose judgment I respect, that the Civil Service Commission is thoughtful and does a nice job. And I think there's a way to work through it. So I think that the hardening of the categories is not appropriate based on, you know, just my sense in listening to this. I think there's a way to work through this that we could really come up with something good.
Thank you.
Alderman Boyd, any questions? Oh, I'm sorry, Ortman? Yeah. Oh, you're gonna finally talk? Sorry, Alderman. Yeah.
Thanks for being here. Welcome.
Thank you.
I guess you're a new employee, kind of.
I am, yes.
Kind of what I think I hear you saying is every time there's an action, you know, we have a reaction, and we want to have the reaction before the action.
Yeah.
So you're like in a position to start dialogue now, and if it passes, you know, we better start moving because we're going to end up dealing with all that we're talking about now anyway. So I would hope that...
And a lot of other things. There's a lot of moving parts in this police department.
Yes.
It'll take time to anticipate how to have a seamless transition. There is a transition period provided for, but it's not too soon to be having these kind of conversations.
No, I agree. The chief left. I kind of wish he would have stayed, but the chairman didn't tell him to stay, so he gets to go home with his family. Since I've been elected, I mean, the number that I thought we should have with police officers is 1,500, 1,550. I think we're down under 1,300 now, actual working officers. And I think sometimes it jeopardizes their safety because they're out there by themselves and, you know, in cars by themselves when there really shouldn't be. And I think that's sometimes when bad things happen. But I'm just throwing this out because you may end up there sooner than what you think in the position of over the place. I mean, I hope you keep everything in a transparent situation, and I think what Alderman Boyd asked the chief was to come up with who he thought should be at the table. But I think that's a question that should go out to many people in this room, actually to everyone that's interested on it, that, you know, who should really be at the table or included in any results when there is a meeting, you know, if you can't possibly make it. So,
I agree with that sentiment.
anyway, we'll be working with you.
Yes, sir.
Good to see you here tonight.
Thank you.
and
Good to be here.
Get your feet wet.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman. That's it. Alderman Boyd, any questions?
Well, first I want to clarify something my colleague said. I'm not sure if I agree with everybody being at the table in the context of what I was saying. What I asked the chief was about personnel issues and matters, and I'm not sure the general public necessarily need to be involved in those particular matters. Were you clear what I was asking about?
No, I thought you meant who would be at the table to discuss, like civilian review board.
No, I was talking about personnel. When he has concerns about hiring and discipline and firing and all of that. I want to just kind of be clear.
Yeah, I don't want to have anything to do with hiring.
Right, me either. Again, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I certainly appreciate your thoughts about public engagement. And I just had a thought in preparation, because we really need to get on the front end of this. Have you thought about creating some kind of advisory group? I know every district pretty much have a public affairs group that meet once a month during certain periods of the year, but maybe getting a constituent from each district, forming some type of advisory group to kind of talk some of this out, maybe to kind of help.
I like getting advice from thoughtful citizens from all across the city. I haven't thought specifically about how to do that. I must tell you that I have a very steep learning curve. I think about all of the departments, divisions that are under me right now that I need to spend a little time understanding how they work, and you know, especially ones that require close attention and that have been the subject of inquiry by this committee, namely the Division of Corrections. That's my #1 priority right this minute, but that doesn't mean I can't be thinking about what you're thinking, what you are suggesting. I think it's an idea, it's a good idea, and it's one that I want to make sure that I'm in a position to provide the kind of time commitment that makes it worthwhile for the citizens before I embark on it. I'd hate to form something and just sort of, you know, show up and, you know, blah, blah, blah. I'd want to be thoughtful about it, and I'd be happy to sit with you and figure out how we might do something like that, Alderman.
Thank you.
Alderman French?
Yeah.
Any questions?
Quick question. So, the chief talked a little bit about this a minute ago, but there are really two big changes in the police, in the management of the police department as far as he's concerned, as far as dealing with his troops. Collective bargaining is a big change, and then also that soon all hiring, firing, and discipline decisions will be made under the civil service process, not him. One of the attractive things about local control, and why many of us have fought for many years, was the idea that finally the buck would stop with somebody in regards to crime in the city of St. Louis. Do you worry that with these two provisions that we set it up where the buck still doesn't really stop with anybody, and in fact we risk that the police department can be as soon as mismanaged and out of control as many other city departments?
You know, none of these things are self-executing, and these are human enterprises that are prone to the kind of frailties that have led to abuses and terrible outcomes in other cities. I would agree with the chief's assessment that we start at a point where we do have a strong organization here, and I think while relations between police and the community in St. Louis have waxed and waned, even in recent times, that those are in strong shape too, in part, in no small part due to, you know, Chief Isom's, I think, good work in the community. I don't think that any of these, that there's anything in particular about collective bargaining or having a civil service board review employment matters that makes that more or less likely. I think in the end, it's up to the people who are principals, and I think in some crucial ways there is more accountability in this system than under the current system, and that would be, and this is something that I recall Mayor Slay saying all along in his efforts to push this, saying, you know, if people are dissatisfied with the way that their police department is running, then, you know, they can throw the mayor out. And under this system, if I read the legislation correctly, the chief of police, unlike under the current system, you know, which has, you know, under which the chief has tenure, although I think that there's a contractual relationship involving, for the first time, Chief Isom, that the chief of police it serves, you know, at will, as an at-will employee, and so for that matter can a director be, you know. So people's heads can roll at the very top, including the mayor, because it, you know, if things don't go right. So I think that there are natural pressures that come to bear in terms of making a police department responsive to the community under this that don't exist under the current state control, where you have 4 members of the Board of Police Commissioners who, while residents, are appointed by the governor, and you know, the chief can say, well, that's the board, and the board, you know, can shrug if it wants to.
Thank you.
All right. Alderwoman Howard, any questions?
Just that I'm glad to meet you, Mr. Roth, and thank you for coming in. I do think that as we move forward on this, that it is going to take a concerted effort of this committee or the Public Safety Committee and you, your office, and the Chief of Police to craft the police department and the hierarchy that belongs in there, and making sure that the police chief has control of his troops.
I agree, and I think we have the potential to do some really great stuff together. Thank you.
Any questions?
No, just a couple of comments. Mr. Ruff, congratulations.
Thank you.
I know I've met you a couple of times. I'm looking forward to work with you. I guess personally, I think I can say this. I think you were a good choice having the background, being a police commissioner and being involved in working with the police department. So, and listen to you speak tonight, I think you're genuine and really wanting to get this done and working together. You know, one of my main concerns is I know we've dipped below the number of police officers from some years back. I know at one time I thought we were supposed to be mandated at 1,600. But I think we're down to like 1,290, 1,280, somewhere in that area. You know, that's one of my main concerns is, you know, as we go on, move on, we talk about, you know, shaping things and doing other things. You know, I want to see things shaped. You know, we need to get more stuff for our police officers out there also. You know, in today's world, riding single-handedly out in a car is not good anywhere. So, you know, I know there's talking, I know, you know, a lot of things are going with these cameras in cars and everything else, you know, with federal money and things like that. I like to see money invested, you know. Like I say, police officers need to protect themselves, and let's be realistic. On the street nowadays, they have less firepower than a criminal out there, and you know, and it's a sad situation. So, you know, I'm looking forward to this coming under city control and hope we can all work together. But you know, along with the citizens, I think they have a lot of legitimate complaints, and you know, I'm looking forward to working with them also. But we just have to make sure, you know, we have to protect the people that's protecting us out there.
I agree with that. I would point out, though, and I'm happy to, I mean, I've given quite a bit of thought, you know, when I was on the police board, we had 1,650, nearly 1,650 police officers, and now we have about 20% fewer, and during the period, under 3 successive chiefs, we have gradually reduced, steadily reduced, the number of commissioned officers, but even more dramatically during that period, crime has come down. I think that you can feel secure in your own mind that St. Louis makes an investment in its police department that is among the highest of any community in the United States, that on a per capita basis, on a geographic basis, we are right up there. And I'm not gonna, it's a longer conversation of, you know, how many is enough, you know, and, you know, if I had a choice between more or less, you know, I like the idea of more, just as, you know, I mean, I understand that argument, but the investment that we make and the staffing levels that we have, including a terrific number of civilian employees, is in the top tier of any city. And it's something I think that we should be proud of, that you should be proud of as, you know, one of the the bodies that deliberates on funding, and so I'm not worried about that. I am worried always about making sure that the men and women who devote their careers to the police department stay safe and are well equipped and well trained and wear their seat belts, you know, and look after one another. But we are, as a community, really stepping up financially to support our police department.
Is that it, Alderman? Mr. Roth, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will comment and say that having local control, we are able to combine certain administrative services that will probably save this city millions of dollars. Maybe we can hire those extra police officers you're referring to.
Maybe. There's a lot of opportunities,
Yes,
Mr.
there is.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John Chestnut with ACLU. And this is the last speaker for the, I will say, Nancy, my colleague from the 22nd have one more question. Came in late. So,
No, we're after John. I'll go after John.
yeah, we can wait. Bring John on up.
And you all saw these last time, but this is language that we're having some problems with, some of the language that Alderman Schmidt read, but also the civilian review statute. If I can make this available to you all, it might help in my presentation.
Sure. Either one. There we go. Because we have the place till 8 o'clock, and it's right at 8, but they're going to let us go over. It's no problem.
I'll try to be as quick as I can.
No. I'm just saying people in the audience. There you go.
So I wanted to start by saying that the ACLU currently has a lawsuit against the ballot initiative, but I want to make it very clear that the ACLU has long been a supporter of local control of the police, and we've been a consistent supporter of that. I was actually the liaison who went to Maida Coleman originally and asked her to sponsor a bill. So we have been at this process for quite some time. And we never did walk away from the Senator Keaveney's bill. We were a part of that coalition all the way through. We did go to another senator to try to get a little tweak in that bill, but nothing that was related to domestic partnership or was a poison pill of any kind. So I just want to emphasize our strong commitment to local control. Now, one of the things that we've always thought was important about local control is that issues that should be decided locally should come back to St. Louis, and those issues need to be resolved here and not in Jefferson City. That's the basic concept. So we've always been advocates of keeping as many preconditions as possible out of the state legislation and leaving as many things for St. Louis to decide as possible in the process here. One of those things is civilian review. And I think it's unfortunate that civilian review has gotten so wrapped up here in this discussion of local control. I don't think it really, needed to happen. I think they're separate discussions. I think we all would have been better off if they were kept separate. It was our concern when we read the ballot initiative that civilian review was brought into this process, and that certain conversations that we always thought would be held here locally were being preempted by the ballot language. And that's why we filed the lawsuit. And that's a little bit of what I'm here to describe today. And I want to emphasize, too, it's not just around the issue of civilian review. That's been the main topic tonight. But the other thing that is quite important to us is this issue of transparency and the issue of whether or not records will be closed. And I'll get to that in a little bit. So basically, what is the ACLU position about this one clause that was added to the language? First of all, it's been said several times tonight that the ballot initiative is essentially the same as what the Keaveney bill was in Jefferson City. And they're not that far off, but some small changes or short, a few sentences can make a big difference. So we focused in on this particular language. In Senator Keaveney's bill, it started off this way, and started and ended this way. The Civil Service Commission of the city may adopt rules and regulations appropriate for the unique operation of a police department. That was all that was in the Senate language, and we were fine with that. The rest of it is what was added in the ballot initiative and where we start to have problems. So first of all, several people have said tonight that it looks like maybe the Civil Service Commission could create some kind of review board. And the ACLU takes exception to that. That might be true. It's one interpretation, but there are other more draconian interpretations, and I want to try to lay those out. So one of the things that was added was that the Civil Service Commission would reserve exclusive authority over the disciplinary process and procedures. Now, so if you look at civilian review, it's not completely amorphous. It's somewhat defined by the state statute, and it's given in the state statute certain mandates of what it's going to do. And that's why I've put the state statute down here below on my paper. One of the things that it's required to do is that the findings and recommendations of the review board and the basis thereof, which would be the investigation, shall be submitted to the chief law enforcement official. So a civilian review board is mandated by state statute to do investigations, to make findings, and then to make recommendations about discipline to the chief. That's not optional from the state statute. If you're going to be making investigations, findings, and then recommendations about discipline, you're necessarily a part of the disciplinary process. You're making these recommendations to the chief, after all, to influence him in some way. He may reject your recommendation, but you're an influential part of the disciplinary process. The problem is that the initiative requires that the Civil Service Commission have exclusive authority. So there's a conflict here between the exclusive authority of the Civil Service Commission and the disciplinary mandate that's required of a civilian review board. And the ACLU sees those two things as being in conflict, and that's why we've taken the position that this actually excludes a review board altogether. Now, there are other interpretations. One of the things that the Safer Missouri argued in their legal brief in our current lawsuit, and I recommend that you all go to these legal briefs because they do lay out the pros and cons of the various legal arguments. One of the things that Safer Missouri argued was that making disciplinary recommendations was not part of the disciplinary process, and therefore there was no conflict. Because, okay, Civil Service Commission has exclusive authority, but making recommendations is not part of the disciplinary process in their view, and therefore there's no conflict. I would disagree. I would say on the face of it, if you're making recommendations to the chief, you're part of the disciplinary process. So I would disagree with their analysis. But there's another interpretation, and it's the one that's, I guess, held sway here tonight, it seems, is that, well, possibly the Civil Service Commission can create some kind of review board. And people who espouse that point to this last section that I've underlined here in the ballot initiative language, that somehow or other there are those who possess the authority to conduct investigations. And they have to, it goes on to say, they're given that authority pursuant to the Civil Service Commission's rules and regulations. Well, this is kind of circular logic in this paragraph. I would say that the two halves of the paragraph are in contradiction to each other. Because on the one hand, it says somebody else can possess authority, but then it also says that has to be pursuant to the civil service rules, and the civil service rules require exclusive authority to the Civil Service Commission. So my reading of this is that they possibly had in mind, they maybe weren't thinking about civilian review, I'm not sure. Maybe they were thinking about employees, investigators who would be employees of the Civil Service Commission, who would be granted authority to look at these closed records and do investigations. But the problem is if you start to, as a Civil Service Commission, grant independent authority to a review board, the more independent you are, the more in conflict you are with the exclusive authority clause. And on the other hand, if you keep the review board close in and they're somehow employees or somehow part of the Civil Service Commission, there's an inherent conflict of interest. And the conflict of interest is that the review board is making recommendations about discipline to the chief, and then if an officer is unhappy with the chief's decision, he appeals back to the Civil Service Commission. So the Civil Service Commission, if you keep the review board too close in order to be in line with this statute, has an inherent conflict of interest. So in any event, no matter how you interpret it, this is a change to the state statute, because the state statute left it open for the city to create a review board any way it wanted to, through the Board of Aldermen, for example, and Alderman Kennedy and Alderman Carter have pointed out tonight that that's what the DOJ recommends. I would say that our Civilian Review Board got much better through the legislative process than when it started, because of all the give and take and that's the mechanism where all the stakeholders come together and give and take and creates some kind of consensus that can pass with a majority. Issue of the closed records is very important. And citizens of the city should have the same right as everybody else in Missouri to their sunshine law. Again, this is an exception that would apply to St. Louis. Everybody else in Missouri would operate under a different sunshine law, the complete sunshine law. We'd have this exemption carved out where we don't get to see those kind of records. St. Louis has operated under that kind of discrimination for 150 years with state control of the department, where we were made an exception. And we don't think that new exceptions and new sources of discrimination should be built into the law. So I just want to close by saying it's very tempting. We're all a little bit war weary. This has been a long battle. Jamala talked about 30 years. I've been doing this for 13, 14 years myself. And we're all a little bit war weary. And we can all see local control within our grasp, and we all, 70% of the city, want local control. So I think it's very tempting to say, let's just get it. It's not perfect. We'll fix it later. But I want to caution against that kind of attitude, because we really need to do it right the first time. These kind of issues are being preempted from the citizens of St. Louis, not allowing us to have the discussion and not allowing us to have the transparency that we want, and that's been talked about tonight for the police department. And to do it wrong is really to lock something in place. You know, it's easy to say, we'll go back and fix it. But I know what it's like to take off a day's work and drive up to Jeff City and testify when nobody up there really cares because their constituents have no stake in the game. And we have fought and fought and fought for years to make changes in these statutes. And the Police Officers Association was able to block it until they changed their mind and decided to, you know, support local control. They effectively blocked this for years. So I think it's fooling ourselves to say that they've made it clear they would block any changes that I'm, you know, proposing or that you or anybody else might want, that would open up civilian review or open up these records. And so I'm almost 60 years old. I'll be dead and gone before we make these changes again. I think it's really important to do this right the first time. And if that means starting over with a new ballot initiative and coming back in 2014, 2014 is not that far away. You know, I think we can wait and do it right the first time. And in conclusion, I just want to say that at the last hearing, I publicly said that we were open to talking to anybody. Mr. Rorda did say to me at a ward meeting that he was willing to talk. I made a phone call to one of the mayor's advisors, and we had a nice lunch and talked about really explaining our point of view to the mayor's office so they would understand. So far, those talks haven't come together. But I would like to see us come back together. I think it is going to take a coalition of everybody to do this and do it right. And rather than just fumble through, I think we do need to, all of us, sit around a table, come to some agreements, make a plan of action, and move forward as a concerted, united city. So thank you.
Thanks, John. Alderman Kennedy, any questions?
No, thank you. No.
None? Alderman Schmidt?
So if I have that right, Mr. Chasnoff, what you're saying is that the original, maybe not the original, but the final language that the state legislature had in 84.344 Section 8 was, the Civil Service Commission of the city may adopt rules and regulations appropriate for the unique operation of a police department, and that's all it said.
That's right. Yeah, all of this other language was added.
Okay, so it is possible under that language that the Civil Service Commission could decide, had that passed, to give themselves exclusive authority over the disciplinary process and procedures, and that records prepared for disciplinary purposes would be confidential closed records. Disciplinary, not investigative, disciplinary.
Well, no, I don't think that would be possible, because
But it doesn't say they can't.
This is specified in state statute,
Understand.
so they wouldn't be able to do anything that conflicted with the current state
Correct.
statute.
But they could decide to do that because there was nothing that prohibited them from doing that.
That what prohibits them from they can't make rules and regulations that violate state statutes.
Correct. And there would be nothing in
And I
state
think
statute
there are
that would
state
prohibit it.
statutes that say that those
Such
kind
as?
of records are open.
Well, no, okay, so then let's go to this. They could develop rules and regulations that reserved exclusive authority over the disciplinary process and procedures affecting commissioned officers and so forth. They could have, under the language of the state legislation, have decided to do that, had that passed. There's nothing that would have precluded them from doing that. What you're saying is that this specifically sets forth that they shall, but they could. It could have been. It could have happened then.
I would have to go back and examine the charter and other things to see if there is any prohibition against exclusive authority.
Okay.
I'm not sure the
well,
answer to that.
apparently there isn't, because they've given it here, and if there is such a provision elsewhere, then this would be stricken anyway. So I think you know, I understand the concern, but I also understand that it still could have happened this same way, and I would urge you to kind of look at that, since what we're doing is we're talking about, you know, putting off local control or not having local control, and if it could have come down in this same fashion. Also, I didn't see anything in this initiative petition that spoke specifically, and I've been focusing mostly on what you've been pointing out and others have in this Section 8, that speaks to the investigative process, the sort of internal affairs kind of process. Do you see anything within this initiative petition that addresses that?
Well, first of all, just as I'm thinking through your previous question, I would say that the civilian review statute prohibits their having that exclusive authority, because it requires that a civilian review board have some input into the disciplinary process. So I think that's one example of where that kind of exclusive authority would have run up against some state statutes.
Yeah, only if there is a civilian review board. So,
But to your second question,
right.
I have some concern as I read this about whether or not records will be available to an internal affairs department if one exists in the new police department. But I'm not really sure whether this
and the reason
I
I asked whether it says anything about investigative investigations, that way we may still have the Geyer versus Kirkwood, because there could be this process with regard to reviewing the personnel records, and then a whole separate one dealing with investigations of crimes and so forth that might be there, and that might be another path for the Civilian Review Board. But I am interested in this issue about whether, in fact, it still could have all ended up this way. And so if we're concerned that they've said shall and they could have done it anyway, I would urge you to kind of at least look at that in terms of how we're approaching whether we support, you know, the ballot initiative.
And I think you're right to point that out as a factor, but were they to have done that, that would have been a discussion here in St. Louis.
Okay.
And not something that was preempted by a small group of people who sat around a table and decided to preempt it. And also would have been much easier to change than trying to go back and change a state statute.
Okay, thank you.
Let me kind of go through here, because some of the guys are trying to get out of here, and I want to keep a full panel up here. Any more questions from anyone here at the board?
Two.
You got two? Go ahead. None there, no? All right.
John, has Senator Keaveney and Representative Nasheed filed their bills? refiled them?
From having talked to Representative Nasheed, my sense of her strategy was to let Senator Keaveney file a bill and get it passed through the Senate and then bring it to the House. She felt confident enough from past experience that she could pass one in the House, so she was going to wait for the Senate bill to pass. So Senator Keaveney filed his bill on December 1st, the first day he was able to do so, but Nasheed has not filed a bill.
Okay, so have there been a hearing, or do you anticipate the senator asking for a hearing?
There hasn't been a hearing, and I haven't talked to him to know what his thoughts are. I know that last time I did talk to him, he wasn't feeling very optimistic about the possibilities for his bill, but how he plans to proceed, I'm not sure.
The reason I asked you that sounds, what you just said sounds contradictory to what someone had approached me. When someone approached me, they felt very confident that there was a bill in Jefferson City that was going to pass, or that was at least going to have a hearing. So you're saying that chances are it won't have a hearing?
Well, the analyses I've heard of it, of its possibilities to pass, especially when St. Louis is in, not presenting the United Front, I think the chances have gone down. I don't know how to rank those chances. But I would also say that even if his bill passes and then the ballot initiative passes afterwards, it's the ballot initiative that would trump the statute. So as long as the ballot initiative is proceeding, I think it kind of, in my mind, takes the wind out of the sails of the legislative process.
Okay, and the second question is, if the city had passed a civilian review when it passed the Board of Aldermen, the mayor vetoed it, if that would be in place today, how would it be relevant, the information, the language that's in the ballot initiative? Because it says if we already have it, then we can use the one, but it's kind of confusing to me. If we had one existing when this initiative passes, we wouldn't have to create one. Would it be, the one that we would operate under?
I'm not sure how to answer that question as you're asking it.
I mean, it's because the language is confusing to me.
Right. What comes to my mind is that particular review board was created under the circumstances of state control. And so it had a lot of ins and outs having to do with that state control. So I think as a practical matter, we would have had to redo the civilian review board when we got local control.
But it says, or may use an existing civilian review board which has been appointed by the local governing body. Each city, county, and city not within the county may establish a civilian review board, or may use an existing civilian review board. So
Right.
if we already had one that passed, then what's in the ballot initiative would be irrelevant. I'm asking you that.
I think from the statute is referring to what was existing when the statute passed, and ours went into effect after that statute passed. So I think I don't think I'd read it the same way.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that it? Thank you, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your time.
We got a couple of people. There was a list out here for people to sign up, and a lot of you did not, and a lot of you came late. We have to get out of here, but it's two individuals that I will allow up. Marlene, the 19th Ward Alderperson, I'll have you come up for 2 minutes, and then Dr. Anderson, same thing for 2 minutes. Okay? Right after Marlene, Dr. Anderson. And I'm timing you, Marlene.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, and to the public. I had promised myself that I wouldn't say anything, but I have to deal with facts. The facts are that every employee has rights, and I've never heard us talk about those rights. I've never heard anybody talk about how the federal government's EEOC rules and regulations apply to what we're trying to do. A civilian review board is no different than a civil service commission, because that is the next place that an employee goes to get remedy for a situation. And that is very much similar to any other employee group out here that has that process in place, whether it's called an employee hearing, whether it's called a union-based hearing that has the employer represented, the union represented, the legal person represented, but an employee has all those rights for interpretation of disciplinary action. So we cannot usurp that out and put it somewhere else. But I am firmly believing that we do need to have some type of citizen interaction with process, procedures, rules, and regulations, how they're formulated, and also how those internal review processes are structured. Because that's the first step in dealing with an employee. Because we have already taken a citizen group, which are the police commissioners, to govern that body. Then we have a civil service group who are citizens that are appointed to also govern and or hear that group. And so when we get into too broad of a lay situation, it becomes complicated, it becomes threatening legally, and a number of other reasons why that may not work. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it, but I'm just giving you some things to think about. And I want to share with Alderman Boyd that we did have a citizens action group under Chief Harmon that worked extremely well. We had 2 representatives for each policing district. We were taught everything about how the police system worked. We learned every department. We had monthly reviews. We had badges and identifications. We could walk anywhere, any lockup, anything we wanted to do. We could do that to find information out and take it back to our communities. So I would propose that something like that would happen again, because I think it brings trust back into the community, it brings knowledge back into the community, and it also forms that relationship that needs to be there with police officers. I used to go to roll call on a regular basis, and I also would ask those sergeants and or lieutenants to bring roll call to the community on that 6 p.m. and that 10:20. Come on out to the community and do roll call so the neighbors can get to know who's working with you. So those are some things that we need to think about, but we need to step back and look at all the legal entities, because we can sue each other all day, and we all can have different viewpoints. But I just wanted to put some facts out there so that preferably we can get past this in the next year, because we do need to do something different and more inclusive, but there are ways to do it, and there are a number of entities out here who do it already. St. Louis Public Schools is one who has hearings that works with the board members who sit there with the union, with the lawyers, and hear disciplinary cases. There are many examples. There's no reason to try to go create something new.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Thank you very much. Dr. Anderson, 2 minutes, my friend. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Chair. I work here at Harris Stowe as an assistant professor of arts and sciences. My primary reason for being here, because I notice a lot of times that the people who are most directly affected by policing are young people. And I always have young people in my classrooms who come and complain about it, but don't feel empowered that anything will happen if they complain about it. And you know, I've had students locked up for days just for traffic tickets, missing exams, because they were just too broke to pay for the ticket. Right. And there was no avenue for them to complain about whether they were arbitrarily stopped or arbitrarily harassed or verbally mistreated, whether they were male or female. In my hand, I have a study. I was thinking about what the union gentleman said for the police. This is a study just done 3 years ago on police, how they treat young people from disadvantaged neighborhoods here in St. Louis City, in this area. It's about 3 years old. It's by, let me get the name, Brunson and Weitzer, on relations here with different urban neighborhoods here in this city. And I think, what the study does show that there's a distinct pattern in terms of how people in this city are treated based upon the neighborhood they're driving from. And some of my students come from neighborhoods that are more disadvantaged, more socially disorganized, and some come from the better organized neighborhoods. And this study bears out what they've been saying. You know, if I come from this region, I'm mistreated by the police officers. So I'm just here to voice my support for strong civilian oversight. I'm not a sophisticated criminal justice bureaucrat, but you know, I'm third generation military, and when we all held our hand up, we all know that the civilians are in charge, regardless of how we feel about it. If you're a general and you say something wrong, the president can call you home and tell you, hey, I'll accept your retirement papers right now. So I think it is the duty of the duly elected officials of this city to accept what they were elected to do and be in charge. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. If you guys want, I got a copy of his study. I'm going to give to each one of the individuals if you would like. He's got copies already? Thank you. Well, here, you can give it to whoever's doing it now. Nancy Rice, you mind coming up? Alderman Boyd have a question for you. And thank you for sticking around.
I did some checking. It was kind of hard because it's been in and out of the legislation, but the general consensus is that was put in, maybe even backed by legislative research, because it's standard language, putting somebody in charge in the case of an emergency. So the sheriff would only report to the police officer in the case of an emergency, and it's pretty standard, and that's really the best I can do right now.
But that would be like St. Louis County taking over the police department of other municipalities or something.
I don't think
it's
so.
It's kind of strange.
I don't think so, Alderman. I'm not, I don't want to go way out defending language that I didn't construct or even watch be born. But I think that throughout the state there is legislation that puts someone in charge in certain emergency situations.
I wonder if the legislative research knew we had this emergency management system. We working with the city of St. Louis has SEMA. Alderman Kennedy, he's not here. It's called SEMA, where somebody's in charge in the emergency. If there's a disaster, and they all come together in the command center, and there's somebody in charge.
City emergency management.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll stay confused. Thank you.
We all are. Here, no, I'm gonna end this because everybody are leaving. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I want to thank SCL TV for coming out and recording this. So those that cannot attend, it will be viewed or aired over our government channels. At this time, I will motion that this meeting is adjourned. Can I get a second? Second. It was second. This meeting is adjourned.